Hello and welcome to the program once again. I'm Anne Nwawado here in Lagos, Nigeria. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel does not intend to occupy or govern Gaza after the end of its war with Hamas, but the enclave must be demilitarized, de-radicalized and rebuilt. According to the Prime Minister, Israel will need to find a civilian government to govern the enclave, which has been run by Hamas since 2006. He did not specify who would form such a body. Mr. Netanyahu's comments are coming days after he said that Israel will take responsibility for Gaza's security for an indefinite period. And that's after the end of its war with Hamas, prompting a pushback from the United States. Israeli officials have also said the Prime Minister's comments did not suggest Israel would assume administrative control of the enclave. In the meantime, the White House says that Israel has agreed a daily 4-hour pause in the fighting in Gaza, allowing people to flee from north to south along 2 humanitarian corridors. However, there is no ceasefire at the moment. U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel says the 2 humanitarian corridors will allow people to flee areas of hostilities in the northern part of Gaza, adding that it is critical humanitarian supplies and assistance be expanded in the areas where people are moving to. Evacuations from the Gaza Strip into Egypt for foreign passport holders and for Palestinians needing medical treatment have resumed through the Rafah crossing. The crossing is also open for aid trucks to enter Gaza.
There will be 2 humanitarian corridors allowing people to flee the areas of hostilities in the northern part of Gaza. The first such corridor, open between 4 and 5 hours every day for the past few days, has already enabled many thousands of people to reach safer areas. The second route along the coastal road will enable many more thousands to reach safer areas in the south. And of course, we are continuing to work closely with our Israeli partners to address and remain vigilant about efforts from Hamas to discourage and prevent civilians from fleeing this area. As we talk about this movement of civilians, it's also critical that humanitarian supplies and assistance are expanded in the areas where people are moving. In the case specifically of southern Gaza, over the course of yesterday, we saw 106 trucks of humanitarian aid flow into Gaza through the Rafah crossing. Rafah crossing remains open today for the inflow of humanitarian aid as well as the safe departure of foreign nationals. So we'll continue to work towards this and make sure that there is apt flow each day.
Well, the Red Cross has also resumed its patient escorts to Gaza border. The organization had to halt operations temporarily after its convoy came under fire earlier this week. The International Committee of the Red Cross, a neutral organization based in Geneva, has escorted patients and freed hostages out of Gaza since the Israel-Hamas conflict began more than a month ago, and it is protected under international humanitarian law. Any halt to fighting between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip for humanitarian purposes will need to be coordinated with the United Nations. And that's coming from the UN spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, who says it is also needed to be agreed upon by all parties to the conflict to be truly effective. Israel is expected to begin 4-hour pauses in northern Gaza just to allow people to flee hostilities. The White House has called the decision a step in the right direction.
Of the hostages.
Well, we've just seen the press reports not long ago. I mean, how any such halt in the fighting and how it would work for humanitarian purposes would need to be coordinated with the United Nations, especially on the issue of timings and location. And obviously, in order for this to be done safely for humanitarian purposes, it would have to be agreed with all parties to the conflict to be truly effective. We saw this like you did, right, on press reports. Well, I'm just talking to you about kind of the principles on our end, right? How if these things are to be effective for humanitarian purposes, they need to be coordinated with us as we are the deliverers of humanitarian assistance, especially on timing and location. And it's, of course, critical that all the parties to this conflict also agree with them. But we're obviously trying to seek out more information.
The World Food Programme says that all of Gaza's 2.3 million inhabitants lack sufficient food and face malnutrition a month into Israel's devastating siege of the Palestinian enclave. Kyung Nan Park, who's the Director of Emergencies in the United Nations World Food Programme, says that the enclave is 100% food insecure at this moment. Humanitarian aid has only trickled into Gaza since Israel began bombarding the densely populated enclave in response to Hamas's raid in southern Israel that killed more than 1,400 people. And that happened on October the 7th. United Nations officials are saying the supplies coming into Gaza are nowhere near enough to meet the population's needs. In addition to funding, WFP says it also needs regular entry into Gaza and safe access once inside to be able to reach the people in need.
Before the October 7, 33% of the population were food insecure. We can safely say that 100% are food insecure at this moment. We would like to ensure the next 90 days, we need $112 million to be able to reach 1.1 million people. So before October 7, there were 400 to 500 trucks going in a day. From that, right now we're entering 40 to 50 trucks. For just WFP food assistance, we would need 100 trucks a day to be able to provide any meaningful humanitarian food to the people in Gaza. We used to have over 23 bakeries working with the World Food Programme, and at the moment, because of lack of fuel, lack of supplies, there's only one functioning. There's stories of people going there, being online for 10 days, and leaving empty-handed. It's quite serious.
At least 14 people are said to have been killed after Israeli forces raided the Palestinian city of Jenin and engaged in a gun battle for several hours. And this is one of the heaviest clashes in the occupied West Bank in months. Rubble and debris was strewn across streets in Jenin following that raid. Eyewitnesses say gunfire sounded for hours as Israeli troops fought very well-armed militants in the streets of Jenin and its adjacent refugee camp where hundreds of heavily armed gunmen are based. Palestinian Health Ministry says that 4 more Palestinians were killed by Israeli soldiers in separate incidents across the West Bank. Clashes also flared elsewhere in the West Bank, with deaths reported close to Bethlehem, Nablus and Hebron, as well as on the outskirts of Ramallah, which is the main city in the territory. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights says that Israel must take immediate measures to protect Palestinians in the occupied West Bank as they find themselves targeted by more violence since the Israeli-Hamas war began last month. Volker Turk said that at least 176 Palestinians, including 43 children and 1 woman, had been killed in incidents involving Israeli security forces since the beginning of October, while at least 8 Palestinians had been killed by Israeli settlers. Before the start of the Gaza war between Israel and Islamist group Hamas on October the 7th, it was already the deadliest year on record for Palestinians in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, with about 200 people killed. The worsening violence in the West Bank has fueled concerns that the Palestinian territory could become a third front in the wider war, in addition to Israel's northern border, where clashes with Lebanese Hezbollah forces have taken place.
After 4 weeks of bombardment and shelling by Israeli forces in Gaza, the indiscriminate effects of such weapons in a densely populated area is clear. Israel must immediately end the use of such methods and means of warfare, and the attacks must be investigated. So appeal as a matter of urgency for Israeli authorities to take immediate measures, to take steps to ensure the protection of Palestinians in the West Bank. who are being on a daily basis subjected to violence from Israeli forces and settlers, ill treatment, arrests, evictions, intimidation, and humiliation. There's also been a sharp increase in settler violence and takeover of land across the West Bank. Since 7 October, nearly 1,000 Palestinians from at least 15 herding communities have been forced from their homes. In the context of the coercive environment they live in, the displacement of these communities may amount to the forcible transfer of a population, which is a grave breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Continued widespread impunity for such violations is unacceptable, dangerous, and it is in clear violation of Israel's obligation under international human rights law. The extensive Israeli bombardment of Gaza, including the use of high-impact explosive weapons in densely populated areas, razing tens of thousands of buildings to the ground, is clearly having a devastating humanitarian and human rights impact.
And also, many institutions already. You say two at a time.
Pregnant, his two young children, and other family members when building bombardments. His children, aged 9 and 7, are. Another Palestinian UN colleague in Gaza told me how she had been close friends the day before. Water is scarce, and indiscriminate firing of rockets into these amount to disproportionate attacks in breach of international practice standards, especially their concerns about double standards, and to use their influence to hold.
You've been listening to Sukari Pedro, who's the DIG for the South-South region, and he's been speaking ahead of elections that will be holding in Bayelsa tomorrow. And now we continue with our usual programming. And now to Israel, meetings between Qatar Emir Sheikh Al Thani and the United Arab Emirates President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Abu Dhabi are just concluded. Now, during the meeting, the two leaders discussed the situation in Gaza. Footage released by the UAE's Ministry of Presidential Affairs showed the meeting, which is also attended by Qatar's Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. The two leaders enforced the UAE and Qatar's calls for an immediate ceasefire, unimpeded humanitarian access, and the protection of all civilians. The meeting came after the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and the Israel Mossad chiefs met with the Qatari Prime Minister in Doha, all to discuss the parameters of a deal of hostilities and hostage releases and a pause in Hamas-Israel fighting in the Gaza Strip. Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today on Channels Television. Now we head to Stephen Hayes, who's an international affairs analyst. Let's talk more about the war. Thank you very much for joining us on The World Today.
Good afternoon, Ann. Nice to be with you again.
Nice to see you too. What do you make of the 4 pauses? They have said that 4-hour pause. The White House says that Israel will be doing this just to allow more people move from north to south. What do you make of it?
Well, it's better than nothing, but the fact is, I think that 4 hours is a very short time, especially if you're trying to move several 100,000 people, which they are. I was reading that now 70% of the population of Gaza is displaced. So you're talking about more than 1 million people moving about. So I don't think it's. I think it's helpful, I suppose, but I also think it's risky. It exposes a lot of people, and so people aren't going to want to be moving en masse and then having it shut off in 4 hours' time. So I think it's more public relations. It's not entirely useless, but you need a lot longer ceasefire.
But the UN Human Rights Agency is accusing both sides of this war of crime. Do you agree? Accusing both sides?
Well, yes, I do. I think that the reality is, I think that in any war, you're going to have war crimes by both sides, even if the cause is totally just, is deemed by one side. The fact is that people do highly emotional things when they're under particular stress and their lives are threatened. Soldiers are angry. They do things. If you're talking about in general, too, mass bombing is indiscriminate bombing is a war crime, and certainly what Hamas did to start all this was beyond any doubt a war crime. But now 70% of the fatalities in Gaza are women and children, and that's inexcusable. It's unacceptable, and yet it continues to happen.
But Calvin, we're also beginning to see tensions brewing in the West Bank. How can this be stemmed so that it doesn't begin another conflict?
Well, they can stop expanding settlements. You yourself referred to it as occupied territory, and that's what the UN refers to it. Even the State Department here refers to the West Bank as occupied territory. So as long as settlements are continuing to be built in what was previously agreed to be a Palestinian territory, the tensions aren't going to stop. And right now, the tensions are going to be far worse because of what's happening in Gaza. The West Bank has been highly desired for expansion by Israel. It's a fertile area as well, and the Palestinians are hard pressed and losing land. Today, 1,000 families were displaced, as I understand it. So it's not going to be easy to do that, to stop the hostilities. The tensions are going to be there. The hatred of one another is going to continue. It's certainly not going to stop just because the war stops. And as long as the Prime Minister Netanyahu encourages that, it's going to continue to happen.
And Stephen, if you're to assess the role the U.S. has been playing in this conflict, what will that assessment be?
Well, I think it's been a difficult role. I think that the question is that is the U.S. seen as a neutral body? No, it's not entirely a neutral body. It certainly is very pro-Israel. The problem is that there doesn't seem to be anybody else or any other country that can step up into that role. So it's certainly been trying to come to an agreement. It's probably kept some countries from entering the war so far. So it's probably been a very positive role in that regard. But it's not seen as a neutral negotiator, and so that's an issue. The home frictions are also putting a lot of pressure on the Biden administration. Netanyahu has a lot of friends in Washington and the United States that put pressure on that. The Congress is split on this at an emotional level as well. So I think the U.S. role has been not as effective as anybody would hope it to be. I think it's going to continue to struggle, and particularly as long as Prime Minister Netanyahu holds out.
Well, do you believe the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's comments when he said that Israel does not intend to occupy or even govern Gaza after the end of its war with Hamas? If you remember, he also said the enclave must be de-radicalized and rebuilt. What do you think he means with these words?
It's hard, given the history of the Prime Minister and his very openly stated contempt for the Palestinians. It's hard to imagine that he's simply going to return it to self-governance. It was barely in self-governance in any case. I expect that there will be a demilitarized zone. If he doesn't take it over entirely, I think there will be a demilitarized zone in the northern area that borders Israel, so that nothing is built there, so that for security reasons. I think that it's going to be very hard to find anybody to govern Gaza if Netanyahu insists that Israel will take care. I guess what was the word? He says he's not going to govern, but yet he's going to control. So who will govern? Anybody who comes in as a caretaker government, it will not have the support of the people. They'll be distrusted because they'll assume it's controlled by Israel. So I think that, no, I don't trust it. I think we have to go on that right now to hold him to it, but it's almost impossible to hold him to any standards at this stage. You understand from Israel's point of view, they see it as too risky, but what are the alternatives? And the alternatives are not very clear.
All right, thank you very much, International Affairs Analyst Stephen Hayes. Thanks for your contribution and what you've been saying on the world today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Thank you.
To other stories now. The 12-year-old Israeli boy whose imminent liberation has been announced by Islamic Jihad in Gaza featured a short film produced last week by an award-winning director as part of the campaign to free him. The boy's mother narrated the story animated film, which depicted her two sons being taken hostage on October the 7th in the wave of Hamas attacks on Israel. Renana Gomer chose to tell the story of her children, Yajil, 12, and 16, who were taken from kibbutz near or while they were alone at home. In the film, created and directed by an animator, Yoni Goodman, well known in Israel for the film Waltz with Bashir about 1982 Lebanon War. Well, that film retraces the last moments that Yajil spent on the safe room of their home on phone with her mother while Hamas fighters were entering the building. 2 of the 4 hostages released by Hamas so far told Gomer that they think they have heard her children while in captivity, news that makes Gomer believe that her sons are still alive.
Bargain chips, they're children. Children anywhere in the world are not supposed to be part of this. Not in Gaza, nor in Israel, nor in Ukraine, nowhere in the world.
On Saturday morning, October 7th, at 6:30 in the morning, the red alert went off and a barrage of missiles fell on our house in kibbutz. My sons, 12 and 13, were alone in my house sleeping. They got into the safe room.
Anyone who sees this can imagine his own children in his house or her house, alone in this nightmare.
Even though my son was trying hard, it closed. The door to the safe room was pushed open. Last I heard was my youngest saying, "Don't take me, I'm too young."
It started with a nightmare that I had that was visualized in animation, so to speak. I woke up in the morning and I said, I have to get this bad dream out of my head. Well, I can't really get it out of my head because I live it, but at least to get it out to the world.
I think of them alone in or a dark tunnel with no sense of time.
It was like it was, you know,
that they are together, keeping each other strong, and that they are with other children who were also kidnapped. Until I see them again, waiting to hug them again.
And they gave it a good ending, which is, they gave me a good ending to hope for. So I'm very grateful for this work, that they think that they heard the voice. And I'm hoping it's true. I believe that the kidnappers, terrorists, know that we treasure life and know that they were taken not for fun, they were taken to serve an interest. And obviously, if they're alive, I think they will serve this interest a lot better. So I'm sort of hoping that it's true and that they're keeping them safe. But as far as I'm concerned, my children should be home now. And that's the first mission that the Israeli government should have on its shoulders, How to do it, I don't know. It's not for me to say, and it's not for me to give them any advice. I'm sure they're working very hard to do so. And it's not an easy solution. There is no easy solution.
A very sad one, and her thoughts and prayers are always with the families on both sides. Protesters entered BlackRock's office in Hudson Yards in New York to accuse the asset manager of being complicit in the war on Gaza, chanting, "BlackRock, you can't hide, we charge you with genocide." Demonstrators held a banner in the lobby at the company's building. The humanitarian catastrophe had unfolded as basic supplies ran out and wounded people overwhelmed a fragile medical system there. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has condemned the recent violence against the Jewish communities in the country. Late on Wednesday, shots were fired at two Jewish schools in Montreal overnight, and clashes between students at the university in the same city. Police on Thursday said they were investigating overnight shootings at the schools in Montreal. Both schools also reported finding a bullet hole in the front doors, but there were no injuries and it was not clear whether the incidents were linked. Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante also told a news conference that the city will not accept those acts and will investigate violence and hateful events. Vincent Richard, Montreal's deputy police chief, has also said there had been an increase in hate crimes in the last couple of weeks, while reiterating police will increase visibility measures in the vicinity of places of worship.
In a series of this morning, we all woke up horrified by the shooting of two Jewish schools in Côte-des-Neiges. And these events are the latest in a series of violent incidents in Montreal to which the SPVM is fully committed. I'm thinking of yesterday's act of violence against students in Concordia University. I'm thinking about the attack of a synagogue in Dollard-des-Ormeaux on Monday night, and the hateful comments that are spilled out every day in the public space and in social media. Since the beginning of the conflict, I've been meeting with the various communities hit hard by the Israel-Hamas conflict. The impact on these communities is dramatic. I appeal to collective responsibility. In the face of our sense of maybe feeling powerless, we need, and fear, because fear is real, we must not give up to violence. This is not who we are here in Montreal. We will not accept it. Every violent and hateful event will be investigated by the SPVM, which spares no efforts to keep our metropolis safe.
In view of the observed increase in tension and events related to the Middle East conflicts on the territory, the SPVM is appealing for calm. Hateful acts are unacceptable, and the SPVM takes them very seriously. We remind you that acts of hatred are prohibited by the criminal code, and arrests will take place. The SPVM is redoubling its vigilancy and making every effort to ensure that Montreal remains a safe city where everyone can live together harmoniously. The SPVM is present on the ground, and we will increase our visibility measures in the vicinity of places of worship and other places of interest. The heads of several neighborhood police stations have been called upon to identify places of interest to the targeted communities, and patrol officer will be present. Of course, all the crimes that are committed will be investigated by the Montreal police, and there will be arrests after the conclusion of the investigation. So our biggest défi is to get the information for people to also denounce certain situations. Like if you're a victim of a hate crime, it's important for the people to denounce them at the Montreal police so we can investigate them.
And
there were some arrests that were made in the last couple of days, and we continue our investigations to do more arrests. So that's something that's ongoing, but there were some arrests for different events. There is an increase in the last couple of weeks, but the important thing I want to say is that a lot of hate incident and hate crime are not denounced to the police service, and that's an important part, that our statistics are not accurate, because it's not everyone that denounces the events to the police service. So it's important for the people, if they're a victim of a hate crime or a hate incident, to denounce this situation to the Montreal police.
Crowds of people gathered in Copenhagen to take part in the Torch March against marking the 85th anniversary of the Nazis' program of Jews. Danish Prime Minister, members of parliament and members of Denmark's Jewish community were among the hundreds who carried torches from the city's main synagogue to parliament. In November 1938, about 1,000 synagogues were damaged or destroyed across Germany and Austria by Nazi mobs. During the night of broken glass, at least 91 Jews were murdered, and about 7,500 Jewish businesses ransacked, and some 30,000 Jewish men and boys were arrested during the assaults, which preceded the Holocaust, or Shoah, in which 6 million Jews were killed.
Come here so we do not forget what happened 85 years ago. It was the start of Holocaust, the darkest chapter in the history for hundreds of years, and of course also in the light of what happened the 7th of October, where 1,400 Israelis were slaughtered in the Middle East.
It's the only place to be tonight in Copenhagen, in my opinion, in order to show that we have to stand up against racism, against Islamism, and against Nazism.
I think there's too much polarization in Denmark, and I sympathize with the Jewish people who are living in Denmark. I think it's a terrible war. I think it's terrible for the Palestinians also.